When you're setting up a small rack or a network cabinet at home, the temptation is to grab the cheapest power strip you can find and hope it'll hold the load. That instinct can save a few dollars at first, but it often leads to overloaded sockets, random shutdowns, or the dreaded pop when a device finally draws more current than the strip can handle. I'm going to walk through why the CyberPower PDU81007 might be the sensible middle ground between a generic strip and a full-blown data center rack PDU, and help you decide if it's worth the extra spend. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's talk about the core problem most people face when they start to add a few servers, a NAS, or a handful of PO switches to a rack. You need individual control over each outlet and you need to know exactly how much power each device is pulling. The PDU81007 offers switched, Metered-by-Outlet capability, meaning you can turn any of the 16 front-facing IEC-C13 sockets on or off either locally via the front panel switches or remotely through a web interface or SNMP. That level of granularity is something you normally only see in much larger, pricier units. For a small office or a serious hobbyist, this eliminates the guesswork of is my router drawing too much, and lets you automate power cycles for a specific machine without affecting the rest of your gear. One practical scenario I've seen work well is a home lab where a user runs a cluster of Raspberry Pi nodes alongside a modest 5U rack server and an unmanaged PO switch. Without a metered PDU, you'd monitor power consumption at the wall outlet, which gives you a blended number and no insight into which node is misbehaving. With the CyberPower unit, you can log the draw of each Pi's outlet, spot a rogue device pulling double its usual wattage, and shut that socket down from a laptop without crawling into the rack. The same principle applies to a small business that wants to reboot a single access point during off hours without pulling power from an entire rack mount switch. Now, the rating on Amazon sits at 4.3 out of 5 from 72 customers, which suggests overall satisfaction but also hints at a few recurring pain points. The most common hesitation I hear from buyers is the derating of the unit. Although it's rated for 200240V at 30A, the device itself is limited to 24A to stay within safe thermal limits. In practice, that translates to roughly 5.8 kilowatts of usable power, which is ample for a modest setup but could be a deal-breaker if you plan to stack high-density servers or a large array of PO devices. The key is to calculate your total load before you buy. If your current draw is hovering around 15A with occasional spikes, the PDU81007 gives you headroom and the ability to isolate those spikes. If you're already pushing 22A or more, you might be skirting the safety margin and could experience thermal throttling or shut-off alerts. Another practical concern is the physical layout. The PDU is a 2U rack mount, so it occupies vertical space that could otherwise hold an extra 1U device. The 16 outlets are all on the front, which is great for visibility, no hidden sockets you have to reach around. However, they're all IEC-C13 style, meaning you'll need compatible cords or adapters for equipment that uses IEC-C19 or NEMA plugs. For a standard lab where most servers and networking gear already use C13 power cords, this isn't a hurdle, but if you have a mix of equipment, you'll need a few adapters lying around, which can add clutter and confusion during a rapid power cycle. The remote monitoring feature is where the PDU really shows its value. Once you connect the unit to your network, you get a web dashboard that displays real-time current, voltage, and power consumption per outlet. It also logs historic data, so you can see trends over weeks or months. This can be a lifesaver when you're troubleshooting flaky hardware. If a device suddenly spikes to 2A on a line that usually sits at 0.5A, you can instantly identify the culprit. The interface is straightforward, no need to memorize complex IP tables or dive into obscure firmware menus. The only downside here is that the web UI isn't as polished as some enterprise-grade PDUs, but it's functional and responsive enough for everyday use. If you're wondering about reliability, CyberPower has a solid reputation in the UPS market, and this PDU inherits many of the same design principles. The unit includes an internal overload protection circuit that will trip the entire device if you exceed the 24A limit, which is a safety net that many cheaper power strips lack. The switched outlets use mechanical push buttons that feel solid, They're not the flimsy toggle switches you might find on a budget strip. The unit also has a built-in RJ45 Ethernet port for remote management, plus a local LCD display that shows the total current draw, useful if you're standing in front of the rack and need a quick glance. Who should buy this PDU? If you